Yeah. Just give me 1 second. I'm just going to... here it is.
Request
I think he has my...
request everyone to be seated. We'll start. A very good evening to everyone present here. Welcome you all to our second Perspectives lecture towards an urban disposition. I encourage all of you to take notes and interact for an enriching experience. It's a great pleasure to introduce our distinguished speaker, Mr. Gautam Bhan, Associate Dean at the Indian Institute for Human Settlements, Bengaluru. His work focuses on the politics of urban inequality, housing, and social protection. He is most recently the co-author of Cities Rethought, a new urban disposition. Let's give him a warm welcome.
Okay. All right. Hi, folks. Okay. Hi, folks. Hi. Thanks. Okay. We both have to get through the next hour together, so work with me a little bit. Okay. Okay. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me. What I want to do over the next hour with you is to get you to step back a little, not think so much about any particular topic like housing or design or construction or materiality or economy, but I want you to step back and think a little philosophically with me, okay? So some parts of this may become a bit abstract, doesn't matter. If it flies over, let it fly. Whatever you hold on to, you hold on to. Don't stress about it, okay? So think with me only about what it means to think about something, okay? Not what you're thinking about something, but what does it mean to think about something, okay? Raise your hands if you've ever been in an argument with somebody who actually you think has the same values as you. The politics is also more or less the same, and you can't quite understand why you disagree so much on a topic. Raise your hand. Yeah? Good. Remember this feeling, okay? This idea of disagreement. I want you to think a little bit about where does disagreement come from, right? It's a very good question to ask in the world in 2024, because apparently in every country in the world, half the citizenry hates the other half of the citizenry, and we are in complete ideological warfare, and you are either left or right, you are either X or Y, and we have these disagreements that are not able to talk to each other, okay? So I want today to think a little bit about the nature of agreement and disagreement, and to suggest to you that part of that is not what we think about something, but the way we think about something. Okay? I'm going to call this an urban disposition, all right? Anyone knows what the word disposition means? Simple English wala definition. Show me your hands. What does a disposition mean? Use your theatre voice. Oh, that's displacement. That's to transport, dispose. That's not quite disposition. Interesting, but not really. Disposition, think about it. Good. It's a bit like a perspective. It's a bit like a nazariya. When it hardens, it becomes your position, your stance, your ideological belief, your faith, right, is a disposition. It's like a set of beliefs. But at its core, actually, before it became what you think, my disposition, my beliefs are X, the word disposition etymologically actually used to mean a sensibility. Think of this word, a sensibility, right? A sense is not quite fixed, but you're beginning to think. It's an intuition, it's a smell, a touch, a feel, it's a sensibility, right? It's a way of approaching things. So the question to ask is, if a disposition is a sensibility, a way of approaching things, I want to offer you one way of approaching cities. Okay? That's why it's an urban disposition. I don't care what you're doing in them. I don't care what the topic of your assignment is. I don't care what brief you've got. None of it matters. This is a disposition that should meet every project, every class, every year. So it's full paisa vasuli types. Okay? You can use it for years. So think a little bit about this idea of saying, before I get into the details, how am I approaching this, right? How do I think about it, okay? And this disposition I give you is going to have 3 kinds of parts. And all I want you to do at the end of the hour is I want you to get a sense of what these parts are, okay? They won't all make complete sense right now, and that's okay, because that's kind of the way philosophy works, cool? But I want you to get a sense of what these could be for you. And I want you to get a little bit of sense of what they look like when you use them. So I'm going to give you the frame, and I'm going to read you 2 stories, 2 excerpts that are an example of my disposition, okay? Each of us has their own sensibility. You can't take mine. You have to find yours. That's one thing about dispositions. You have to find them slowly, over time. You'll read things, you'll change, you'll grow, you'll travel, you'll get your heart broken. Heartbreak is very good to develop a sensibility. Right? Underrated learning pedagogical experience, but guaranteed in life, at least once. You can laugh at that, guys. With this serious, that if this joke does not work, I will not survive the next hour, okay? So loosen up with me a little bit. You're looking very seriously at me, okay? All right. I'm not even wearing shoes. Like, you don't take me that seriously, okay? Okay, so let's try this. Let's do this together. Do you recognize this picture? Show me hands. What do you think this is? What's happening here? Yeah. Okay, guys, theater voices. Come on, rise. Okay, people walking back during the lockdown. Who are the people and where is back? Someone from here? Yeah?
Someone who has come out for work in the other places and who is going back home.
So going back home, and where is this home? How do you know it right now? Where is the home? Give me hands. Someone here? To villages, okay? Something called the rural. Where are they going from? They're going from cities, right? So in one way, you have this, right? There is a word. This is a kafila. This is a caravan. This is a jatha. This is a procession. These are people leaving in their hundreds, okay? They are leaving here, right? Were they supposed to be doing this? Were they supposed to be doing this? What was happening when they were doing this? Starts with L, rhymes with walk down. Excellent. You guys are really good, okay? This is a lockdown, right? We had one of the harshest, outside China, one of the harshest lockdowns in the world, okay? All right? So when they're doing this, they are risking police, they are risking imprisonment, they are violating the law, right? And how far are they walking? How far are they walking? Are these tens of kilometers? No. I want you to sit with this for a minute. To walk hundreds of kilometers in the middle of a pandemic on a highway, risking the police, and still think that is what you should be doing. Not one person, not 10 people, but thousands of people. Okay? You all have come here, somewhere or the other, to be urban practitioners. I want you to look at this and say, why are our country people leaving the cities we are meant to be making? I want you to think about this question. So tell me, first step of a disposition, try and think about what is happening. Okay? You've just told me what is happening. Now try and think very carefully, very shortly, tell me, why do you think they're doing this? What is it that they are? When you look at this, like a doctor, diagnose it. Why do you think they're doing it? Why are they taking all these risks? What do you think? Yeah. Of food. Okay, so let's pick up that one thing. Hunger. Okay, they're leaving because they're worried about hunger. There's a lockdown, right? Now remember, every person, if hunger is the problem, what is it that you should do? How do you answer that problem? Now, in the pandemic, you can't grow at that point. Keep yourself in the pandemic. You've got a problem, you're solving the problem. That's where disposition comes. So he's saying the problem is hunger. Give me a solution. Show me hands, show me hands. Yeah. You could buy the food, right? So it goes back to a question of affordability, and I want you to see who is walking and who could afford to buy the food and who couldn't. So think a little bit this, and now start thinking about what you're thinking about. What else could you do? but you can't grow the food in a pandemic. Itni jaldi to you won't grow it, no? So what else could you do? Throw things out there, don't worry. A good government scheme. Think about COVID now. Do you remember hearing about government schemes that fed people? Do you remember about ration being distributed? Do you remember about cooked food meals being given, right? So it's not like we weren't trying to solve one problem. Now think about this connection. You look at it and you say they're leaving hunger. And what's your answer? If they're leaving hunger, respond to the hunger. Provide the food. Provide that interim, right? The Chief Minister of Delhi, I was in Delhi during COVID, working with the Delhi government. The Chief Minister of Delhi got up and gave a speech to these people and said, don't leave. I promise you, no one will be hungry in Delhi. I was part of an emergency hunger response committee. We gave 58 lakh households ration. 1,800 government schools gave 2 cooked meals a day. Lots of gaps, lots of issues. But there was a question. So think about this connection. If the diagnosis is hunger, if the analysis is hunger, one part of the response is to feed people. Why else do you think they were leaving? What else could be happening? Throw things out. Comfort zone. This sense, and a lot of people had this. I want to go, what did you say? I want to go home. Think of that word home, right? Then part of your, now what's the analysis? Homesickness. A lack of trust in the city. A lack of family in the city. Hunger is easier to solve than homesickness. What do? What's the operation? What's the answer to a sense of saying, I've lived in the city for 10 years, and even today, the minute I'm scared, I want to leave. What does it mean about cities that you don't have that sense of belonging? That the question in crisis is to leave. And think about, this is not just these people on the highway. Think about yourselves in COVID. Think about the instinct you had to go home, right? Even though you had the infrastructure, you weren't looking at hunger, but even you wanted to go home. Much harder analysis, right? Okay, give me one more. I ran. Why else are they leaving? Right? Could be loneliness, could be belonging, could be fear for the people that are not here, right? Could be that. What else? Yeah. Housing. Excellent, right? So a really interesting story. The other thing that the government of Delhi promised is that they told landlords to forgive rent. Do you remember this? They said, don't take rent. For 2 months, don't take rent, right? They tried. And what was really interesting is, every journalist who met these guys on the road, every single one, said, why are you going? The vaccines will come first to the city. The healthcare is better in the city. You are safer from disease in the city, right? Hunger we will solve by public government feeding programs. The one thing they had no answer to was rent. And when the Stranded Workers Action Network, a set of academics, started interviewing tens of thousands of people who walked on highways, 41%, the largest answer on the question of why are you taking this risk was not hunger, was not coronavirus, was not disease, was not death. It was rent. Okay? So think a little bit about this connection, right? Think about, if you look at this, how you decide what the problem is determines how you solve the problem. Just make that connection for me. How you decide what the problem is, what your diagnosis is what determines what you will do. You match. It's a little bit of all of these. And for each one of these individuals, the proportion of rent versus sickness versus loneliness versus hunger is different. For each one of them, it adds up differently, right? But just think of this connection. The first point is not what does one do? How do you solve the problem? The first point is what is the problem? If the problem is rent, then feeding doesn't stop anyone from going, right? That's exactly what happened with the Delhi government. We could not understand why people were leaving despite every assurance. But the thing that scared them was not, are you afraid you'll lose your job? They said, we're construction workers. We do dehadi kaam. We'll come back, there will always be work. The domestic worker said, we will get work. If this house doesn't give me work, a new house will give me work. It was not about employment. It was not about job security. It was not about hunger. It was about rent. But none of us diagnosed rent as the pandemic problem because we thought we were in a health epidemic. But we were not. We were in an urban epidemic. A health epidemic is about disease. An urban epidemic is about housing and work and belonging and fabric and cities. You see this small move that changes your analysis, it changes your practice. This is a disposition. The relationship between what you frame the question as, so much of your practicing lives will be people asking you for solutions. And half the time you will be solving the wrong problem. You will be asking the wrong question because we don't spend nearly as much time on getting the question right as we get on getting the answer right. Okay? Think about this as a disposition. Tell me one more thing now. Not you personally, but why? Tell me positions that people may take. Why do you care? Why do you care about solving the problem? Why do you care about stopping them? Why do you care about them not going? You've done a what, you've done a how. I'm now asking you a why. Why do you care? Not you personally, because otherwise people will say, did you see what he said in the lecture that day? He was like, I don't care about poor people, I care about health, right? Why would one care, okay? All of you please agree not to judge each other's answers and personalize them for tomorrow morning's chai session, all right? Come on. Why would one care? Tell me. What would be the possible reasons to want to solve the problem? Forget what the problem is. Give me someone new. Yeah. You flicked your chin on the thing, so now I've caught you, so now you got to go. Anything. Any kind of answer. Right, you, with there, on the side, with the glasses. Yep. Just, why would you want to solve this problem? What's primarily in your mind? To help the people. Very good.
If we create urban environments, we need people to stay there.
Yeah.
Everyone is going back.
Yeah.
Point in the
Yeah. So you want to help the people. You also want to help the people because your lives depend on the labor of these people. Right? And you heard a lot of us, and I mean us, okay? You heard a lot of us talking about how difficult it was to get help during the pandemic, right? Because for us, this is not people, this is labor. And good. For many people, they were like, सब मजदूर शहर छोड़ के चले जाएंगे, तो boss, मेरी जिंदगी कैसे चलेगी, right? Cities need this labor. Good. Why else do you want to solve the problem? Someone from here? Why else do you need to stop these guys? Yeah. Basic sense of human empathy, very good. And remember that empathy could be coming from I need this labor or I'm a social justice warrior. Okay? All sensibilities. And I'm not judging either of these guys. I don't want you to be either. I just want you to think about the motivations. Yeah. Excellent. You are in charge of the health response. You are like, people need to stop moving. I don't care if it's migrants or rich people flying or that kid who did a party on the boat, like whatever his name was, right? This is my thing. They're like, so if you're a health professional, you're like, empathy is lovely. I also care about the people. But the right way to care about the people is to stop the disease. Right? So health professionals were saying, it's not empathy and emotion, boss. I care about people, so I'm locking you in your house so you don't die. That's empathy. Right? As a child of doctors who grew up in AIIMS, I was surrounded by these voices in my WhatsApp chat. Okay? And being told, literally, one of my colleagues who was a head of epidemic prevention at AIIMS looked at me, he said, this is not the time for your feelings, Gautam. Okay? People need to be alive to have feelings. Okay? Lock people up and band karo sabko. This is my point. He doesn't lack empathy. I don't lack empathy, but our empathy takes different forms. Why he cares is different from why I care. It's not right or wrong, guys. But the fact that you care, or your position cares, about stopping the epidemic, which means you are not thinking about rent or livelihood or empathy. You are thinking about your role. You will stop them at any cost. Right? In fact, what you will say is either bringing back and lock them up, or send them a truck, take them to the village and lock them up. Just stop them moving. Right? Why else could you care? Tell me. So you could care about the labor, you could care about their own suffering, you could care about solving a health problem. This is a pandemic. Why else could you care? What else could motivate you? Yes, absolutely. Right? You may be seeing your own vote bank leave, You may see as a politician that if they're leaving your city, it makes you look really, really bad, right? So you may want them to leave at night quietly, but not in the day when S. Harpal Singh of the Hindu can take a photograph, okay? This is a very important reason to care. In fact, many of you, if you ever end up doing political government work in Delhi, I swear to you, at least once in your life, you will be told, as long as किसी को पता नहीं चले, तुझे जो करना है कर ले. Right? And the other version of that is, as long as the English newspaper writes about it, I don't care, Marathi में एक शब्द नहीं आएगा. Okay? That is actually democratic politics in most of India. Okay? All right? So think a little bit about a lot of this work. Okay? So where are we? So now you've got three things. Okay? So let's work with me. Well done, guys. Very nice. Thinking. Analysis. What is the problem? Is it rent? Is it loneliness? Is it fear? Is it hunger? Is it livelihood? Right? What is causing what's happening is intimately linked to doing. Okay? Because how you diagnose the problem determines the kind of practice that you will do. All right? So I want you to think very closely. A lot of the times you will hear this in your time here and in your life, the debate between theory and practice. Okay? This is not that debate. That debate is told very poorly. People are not either theoreticians or practitioners. It's not like practitioners stop thinking or theorists do nothing but academic gyan giving. Okay? That's not the way it is. Right? The real thing is for both practitioners or theorists, whatever you want to call yourself, this relationship between thinking and doing is very key. And the reason I asked you why you care, because the last part about the disposition is the one we pay the least attention to, which is feeling. I have never met a practitioner who has made a difference in the world because they were technically brilliant, if they did not actually also give a shit about the problem they were solving. Okay? My friend Mario De Pena is a historian, and he's always given me this thing that I love. The balance between empathy and rigor. Okay? You can have a lot of empathy in the world, but if you don't have the rigor to do the doing right, your empathy is not helpful to anybody except that you can feel good about yourself, which you should. Okay? But the counter is also that you can be the most skilled technician, but if you forget your empathy, remember somebody also designed the atom bomb. Okay? You can be a skilled technician with the deepest rigor, but if you lose your empathy, you lose your way in a different way. So you can think separately from doing. You can do separately from thinking. And you can keep thinking and doing separately from feeling. Okay? A lot of the time people say, "Na yaar, isme politics mat la." Okay? Isme politics mat la is keep it objective, keep it technical, keep it simple. Don't get into the feeling. Don't get into the motivation. Don't get into the values debate. Let's just solve the problem, okay? We, and this we is us of those who get trained in the urban sciences, particularly the technical, professional urban sciences. This is a danger you have to fight all your life. To be told that your technical skills are enough and politics is messy. Politics is not messy, politics is life. But politics is not just capital P politics of ideology and left and right and party. It is the relationship between feeling, thinking, and doing. In our language, in this book that's outside, if you guys want to take a look at it, the one I'm talking about today, we called it the normative, okay? From the idea of norms and values, the analytical, from the notion of analysis, of diagnosis, and the operational, from the idea of practicing. That's our urban disposition. The normative, the analytical, and the operational. And it is really important that all three of those go together. What does that mean? Work with me a little bit. So if a disposition is this sensibility, a tendency of mind, right? An orientation of being and understanding the world, but it has not yet become your ideological position, your faith, right? My dad used to say, ideology is when ideas stop moving, stop growing, stop breathing, okay? Then, one of the points of the disposition is to try and remake the way you think about cities. holding these three things together. Okay? That together, if we are trying together to ask what are our normative locations, which means what are the things you care about, and what are the things we collectively as a society care about. Okay? If you ask what are the problems in our cities collectively, then applying this disposition is actually the ability of building that public that our cities can hold. So that when you look at those people on the highway, you don't say them and us, but you say we. That we currently doesn't exist. And we would be lying to ourselves if we said that when you look at that image, you relate to it. You don't relate to it. I don't relate to it. We can't relate to it. It would be a lie to relate to it. How then do we relate to a public when this is our public? That's part of the work of a disposition. Okay? So, let me just run you three of the possible elements. The first thing we think an urban disposition should do is that it must articulate normatively where it begins and what motivates it. For you as an individual, this means something very simple. You have to put your stake in the ground. You have to say what you believe in. You have to say what you value. You have to say what you want, right? If you don't do that, none of us know why you're trying to solve the problem you're solving. Are you moved by hunger? Are you moved by pandemic? That's a very specific example. But in broadly, what is the world that you want to live in? What are the things that you think are worth fighting for? If you don't put your cards on the table, then these two parts of empathy, the empathy because I need my workers to come back, and the empathy because I care about the poor, and the empathy because I want to stop, you can't tell them apart. Now, very often, the way we do this is very simple. What is your party? Which morcha do you stand behind? Which jhanda do you want to rehlao? Which is the slogan that you like? Okay, I can give you 4 slogans right now and tell you that. I want to suggest to you that that's a very poor way of doing the normative. I instead want to say to you that your work, my work, is not to tell you what the right politics to have is. My job is to say as a disposition, don't pretend you don't have a politics. Don't pretend that you don't have a set of values. And fight to find out what your values are. Articulate them. Because if you articulate your values and I articulate my values, we can disagree productively. We will know why we're disagreeing. Right? If both of us want to do low-income housing, and you believe the market should do it because it's more efficient, and I believe the state should do it because it's a public good, we don't disagree normatively. We disagree operationally. We can still work together. But if I believe housing should be a right and a basic need, and you think housing is a market, we don't agree normatively. We will never come together. Right? The job of thinkers, of scholars, of practitioners is to articulate their values. And too many of us actually say, I'm not moving from values. I'm a technical professional. I'm a scientist. I'm a data scientist. I'm an engineer. My work is scientific, apolitical. Okay? There is no such thing. There is no such thing. In the deepest laboratory science, you will find the question of normative values. We spend a lot of time trying to find the right ones. I'm telling you, find any one you like, but own it. And that's part of the work of the disposition. Okay? Once you have that, once you know why you care, you can begin to do what you're doing now, which is to build your ability to ask the right question. To analyze that image and say, is it housing? Is it rent? Is it economy? What part of what? This is the stuff you will learn here at CEPT. You will learn how to disaggregate the data. You will learn how to cut the question 100 ways. You will learn how to attribute it. If you're a data scientist, you'll use regression. If you're a qualitative researcher, you'll use ethnography. Different methods are doing the same thing. Tell me what's going on in the fullest sense of it. Okay? But your challenge here is that you will be trained to do that in one discipline. And the world has never cared what your disciplinary training is. No problem in the world has given a shit if you're an engineer or an anthropologist. I'll give you a quick example. Give drinking water in an informal settlement in this country. Okay. Tell me, what do you need to know analytically to give drinking water to a slum? What all disciplines do you need? Simple problem. There is a basti, you have to give pani in a tap. Who all do you need around the table? Give me the think analysis. So what is that analysis? Who does that work? That's a technique. You need to do a survey, right? So tell me the kind of tech. Who's going to do that survey? Do you need planners, engineers, economists? And that's the kind of thing I'm asking. What kind of analytical questioning skill do you need? To solve the problem of giving water in a slum. It's a simple question. Right? You all are urban practitioners. There is a basti in Ahmedabad. It needs pipe water supply in a house. Tell me, what disciplines do you need? What do you need to do to solve this problem? Just think with it. Who all needs to be there? So first thing, you need to know the number of households. All right, what else? Good, you need an engineer to build the system, right? And that engineer needs to know how to build a system that will fit the basti. Not a gridded layout with lots of space in the middle of the road where the pipe has already been laid, right? So that engineer will know how to shove a pipe under a house that already exists and is built badly, as opposed to happily being able to dig and lay it out. So good, so you need an engineer and you need a typical type of engineer. Who else do you need? Good. Be an outsider. Be an expert. We're doing discipline right now. So a person who knows the place. You mean what? Culturally, socially, like understands the people, like that? What is that discipline called? Take a guess. The people sciences are called. Starts with S, rhymes with ology. Brilliant. Excellent. Sociology. Good. So you need a sociologist. Why do you need a sociologist? Why do you need to understand this?
To understand the problem.
What about it? I'm telling you that the pipe dalni hai, pipe hai nahi. There's no access. Why do you need a sociologist? Why can't the engineer just build the pipe? That's my only question. Why do you need a sociologist? Oh, so the engineer can't do data collection, is it? What is this? Tell me what is the specific kind of data a sociologist will tell you that an engineer won't? What about people, guys? Don't be shy. Come on. You don't need just number of people. What do you need to know about people to fix a simple problem like giving a pani in a basti? Yeah?
The way people tend to gather water in their pot.
Good. And what do you already know about the way people in a basti in India gather water? People. Stick to people. Who are these people who gather water, guys? Yeah. No, that is the way you gather paper. Who are the people? Why do you need to know something about the people? Why do you need a sociologist to build a drinking water pipe? It's a simple question. Tell me, what do you need to know about people? Why can't the engineer just build it? Because then I don't need this disposition. I don't need to ask why he cares, what he thinks the problem is. Tell me, why do you need a sociologist? Communicate what? Okay. Technically, I think an engineer should be able to tell you why he's building a pipe, where he's building a pipe. Tell me more. Why do you need a sociologist? The amount of water will be part of the engineering. It will be part of the pressure. Why do you need a sociologist, guys? If the sociologist is not there, what will go wrong? Tell me. Think. What do you know socially about water that is not about the engineering of water? They may. They are likely already fighting about water, which is why we're trying to build the damn pipe to go to their house. When you stand in a basti in Delhi and there is a community stand post and there is a line for water, who is in the line? Women, right? And when you look at the standard dropout rate from high school, when do most girls leave school? Class 8. When do boys leave? Class 12. And one of the major reasons why they leave in 8 is because they spend 4 hours a day collecting water. Okay? So the fact that where the pipe goes, right, the question of what timing the water comes is going to be a deeply gendered impact that the sociologist will explain to you. But you need one more thing from the sociologist. Does it matter if you have a community tap, which gully of the basti you put the tap in? Why does it matter? Why does it matter which gully I put the tap in? Why don't I just put it in the widest gully where the engineering pipe will have the most space? So accessible means I'll put it where I have the most space, right? Or I'll put it in the flattest part of the basti, where the land is most concrete, where it's safest. Why would that be a problem? Why will that actually reduce water access instead of increasing it? Think about our society, guys. This is the analysis part. Think about our society. Why does it matter which gully of a basti you put the tap in? Let me hold you. No. It starts with C. What are all these code words, guys? What are these communities living together? If you're afraid of diagnosing Indian society, you're not going to fix a water problem. It starts with C. It ends with what? Yeah, it's called caste. Because if you put a tap in the most accessible place in the basti, where the upper caste live, then the Dalit part of the basti is not going to get in line for the tap, guys. This is why engineers have not solved a simple drinking water problem in this country for 50 years. Because they think that the sociologist has nothing to tell them. They don't understand the question of that line, right? So if you open a newspaper today, you will get 5 stories in India about the question of caste and water. Water in India is not an engineering problem. It is a caste problem. And so where you put it in the basti determines everything about it, because the basti is geographically separated and demarcated by caste. And if this is something that you're not instinctively thinking about, this is what you all have to do in the next few years. That's where that analysis comes. You ask the engineering question when you should be asking a caste geography question. And the engineering will not get you out of it. We know how to build pipes, guys. So think about, if we know how to build pipes, why aren't the pipes there? When you look at something, a disposition pushes you to say, don't analyze in your box. Push to think about the multiple reasons why something could be happening. Who else do you need? You need an engineer, you need a sociologist. Who else do you need? You need so why do you need the government? Correct, but we're trying to provide it. So let's assume the government is asked to do it. But tell me, there's one more reason why you need the government. So give me the discipline. We've done engineer, sociology. Give me the discipline. Government's not a discipline. Yeah. Good. Good. Why? Okay, so it could be that the work could be done. So you need a political scientist to tell you that if the MLA is inaugurating the project, it will move faster. Fair enough. But tell me, why do you need the government to give water in a basti? Why can't the people just get together, pay an engineer, and do it? Why do I need the government? When you get water in your house, do you write to the government? How do you get water in your house? How do you get water in your house, guys? You know, one thing is, asking big questions about cities is lovely. Once in a while, ask the simplest question, which is, मेरे घर की बिजली और पानी किसने दी? How do you get water in your house? I know your parents did it, but suppose you live in your own house. How do you get water in your house? Simple. How do you do it? All that is access. You? Listen, you have never connected a pipe to get your own water. You all are acting as if you come into your house and say, plumber ban jata hoon, ye kar daun. How many of you have connected a pipe to get water in your own house? Don't give me this shit. How do you get water in your house? The correct answer is you have never gone to a house where water was not already there. That is the actual answer. But imagine you had to get it. What would you do? Huh? How do you pay money? You have to get the connection first, boss. You're paying money to who? Mythical money you're throwing out of the balcony like this. The jal board is going to just come stand there and collect your rupees or what? It's a simple question, Sept. Come on. How do you get a water connection in a house? तुम तो घर डिजाइन कर रहे हो, उसमें पानी कहाँ से आएगा? It's not a trick question, guys. हाँ? तो म्युनिसिपल पाइपलाइन से तू खुद जाके उसे कनेक्ट करके लेगा क्या? हाँ? But you are not touching the pipe, no? So guys, literally it's not a trick question. What do you do? Huh? You don't call a plumber to get a water connection, my friends, guys. Okay, guys, perspectives mein thoda life skills. Okay, move to house. Okay, what do you do, guys? Where's the hand? Yes, you apply to the municipal water board for a connection, okay? You put in an application. Why doesn't the slum just put in an application? Why are we doing all this drama? Because they're not considered houses. And who's going to tell you that? Who's going to tell you that it is illegal for a jal board to put a water pipe in a slum because the basti is not considered legal housing? So you are not allowed to apply. So it's not about the engineering at all. It's not about the affordability at all. It's not about the economics at all. Every slum household I know will give you as much money as you want for water. But no one will take the application. Pani Hak Samiti versus Government of Maharashtra, where the basti went to the court and said it's a human bloody right in the constitution, you cannot deny me water. And the court said, as citizens of India, you can take water anywhere, but not in a slum. So what did the court say? I'll give you a community stand post. I'll give you a hand pump. So have you thought about why there's a hand pump and not a null inside the house? Not because of poverty. It's very easy to look at a basti and say, paise nahi hai isliye hai. Because the law says you cannot build infrastructure in an unauthorized settlement. Okay? It is why every unauthorized colony. How many of you from Delhi? Hands? How many of you have heard of Scenic Farms? You've heard of Scenic Farms? Yeah? Okay. Tell me, can Scenic Farms apply for a water connection? No. You know, when you enter Scenic Farms, the first thing you see, a sign that says, Mrs. Gupta, please pay road tax. Okay? Why is Mrs. Gupta being harassed for road tax? One, because she didn't pay it, and really she should have, she lives in Scenic Farms. Okay? But why is Mrs. Gupta paying road tax to Scenic Farms? Because the municipality will not build the road, because Scenic Farms is an unauthorized colony. It doesn't look like one. Slum nahi lagta na. So you're like, Scenic Farms illegal kaise ho sakta hai? Exactly, Scenic Farms hi illegal hai. So they do what? Build all their infrastructure privately. Just like the slum. But gali slum ko padegi, Scenic Farms ko nahi padegi. Okay? This was Asha Gertner's work on Delhi, a lovely book called Rule by Aesthetics, who said in Indian urbanism, if something doesn't look illegal, it is not illegal. You can build a mall on forest land, no problem. But you can't build a basti on public land. Then it's encroachment, right? But go back to that question. What does it take to give water to a basti? An engineer who knows how to build the right pipes, a sociologist who tells you about caste and gender in location, a political scientist who tells you about the government signing off on it, and an urban planner who tells you that the spatial illegality of the housing form is the reason the water's not there in the first place. So when you become practitioners and you go to solve the problem of water for poor people, the analytical part of the disposition first says, "Pehle pucho pani hai kyun nahi?" And when you ask that question, answer it in 5 ways, not 1. Don't look for the singular solution. That's the push of an analysis that is open, that restructures, that rethinks. With me? Yeah? Got it? We can do 10 examples like this. But I just want you to think of the approach to it, to understand what is broken first before you run to fix it. Okay? Because that is when you come to the last part of the disposition, the question of operations. Okay? The question of thinking about operationality. All right? Half our problem is that we all start there. We go straight to solution. We go straight to action. I have nothing against solutions. I have identified as a practitioner all my life. But to practice without taking the time to understand the problem you're trying to solve is to create the problem in the first place. Okay? Remember this discipline in your work. Right? Okay, so last thing out, then I'll tell you one story and then we're done. Okay? So, if you don't hold these 3 things together, the normative, the analytical, and the operation, what happens? You get knowledge that is normatively driven, but lacks the analytical rigor needed to give shape to values, motivations, and beliefs. Rigor without empathy. Okay? You get practice that is operationally deeply efficient, but it lacks empathy or a value for dignity or that seeks to solve the wrong problem. Classic example, requiring Narega payments to be done digitally through banking systems instead of in multiple ways in which actually works for rural workers. Right? Mandating technological transfer for daily wage payments in small town rural India. Right? To think about those questions. Or you get the biggest problem sometimes, or the worst of our academy, which is you get analytical frameworks that are so convincing, so well written, so well cited, so sharp, written by deeply famous people, that are either the engineering story, or the sociological story, or the political story, or the planning story, but never all the stories together. You have 10 books on water in slums written by engineers, 10 books on gender and caste in slum written by sociologists, 10 books on governance and democratic relations, and 10 books by planners on spatial illegality. Who's going to put those 10 books together? Because in the Basti, all of those arguments come to the same point. The world does not care about our different canons and our different core courses and our different theoretical frameworks. It cares about understanding the lived experience of the problem. Okay? And if you do that, the last part about the work is what my mother used to call paralysis by analysis. Okay? Which is a healthy production of critique that gives you absolutely no sense of how to move. Knowledge that produces self. I am not against critique. Let me say this. I think critique is an essential part of philosophy and thought. You need it. You need to survive. But there are critiques that have an empathy for practice and critiques that are actually criticism. And I want you to hold this distinction between critique and criticism very closely. Criticism is to critique something to tear it down. Critique is to tear something down to build it back up better. Your normative, your value, your ethic is to say, I'm critiquing you so we can do better. There is a distinction between that sense of critique and that sense of criticism. But too much of our work, one of my teachers used to say, I can't resist the endless pleasure of the damning critique. Okay? You will remember this line because when you meet your first really nasty juries at CEPT, you will remember this, the endless pleasure of the damning critique. From the jury side, it's very seductive. बहुत मजा आता है, I have to just say. But it is one of those things. The question is, why are we doing that critique? And you know this from when you receive that critique. If you hear critique where you feel like someone is invested in you doing better, even if it's really harsh, you'll listen. But if you hear it as criticism where you feel like there's no interest in actually stating out the problem, you'll stop listening. Okay? All right. With me so far? Right? 3 out elements? Okay. So then I have one story to tell you about a different kind of practice and then we're done. So I'm going to skip a bunch of things. So let me just keep going for now. These are 3 very nice art pieces. So I didn't tell you the story, so I can't refer to the art. Ask me later if you want to ask. So I want to end with this idea of practice, okay? And the question of what to do. And then I'm going to read you a section from the text that talks about a part of practice from my own life. All right, here we go. So some of the things that I want to leave you with if you become urban practitioners, and this is something that the book also does. The first thing, you have to know how a city actually works. So what we did today, the fact that when you imagine the Basti, you're not imagining a geography of caste. You're not thinking about the actual government agent who gives you the water supply. These things, guys, are not context or background. If you don't intimately know how a city works, actually, how it should work on paper, how it should work in practice, if you don't know who to call to fix what problem, if you don't know the governance ecosystem of a city, बाकी सब design, planning, architecture आप नहीं कर सकते. I want to be very clear. There is nothing, as urban practitioners, it is our work not to understand our site or our project. It is to understand the city in which we live in. People used to hate me in architectural juries because I'm not an architect, so I don't understand anything about models. And I would never ask anything about the model or the design. I would only ask 3 questions. इस ज़मीन पे पहले क्या था? इस साइड के पीछे क्या है? और इस साइड के राइट पे क्या है? And everyone would say out of syllabus question. Out of syllabus question नहीं है, एक ही syllabus है. Syllabus शहर है, project नहीं. Don't lose sight of that. Understand how your city works. Okay? Second is you have to understand a little bit how to read कि किस moment पे क्या हो सकता है. You are not going to be practitioners just ऐसे. You are practitioners in a particular historical moment, right? You may become practitioners where bamboo becomes the most modern material to build with because climate change will change everything we knew about concrete, right? What will be asked of you as urban practitioners will be to limit. In fact, whenever I'm asked by any architectural schools, what should we teach? I'm like, can you please tell us, how do we break down all the concrete we built? Tell us how to break it down, because if we don't break down the concrete we built, there is no just transition or sustainable development or surviving the Anthropocene. We spent 200 years loving concrete, and now we have to get rid of concrete, and ain't nobody told us how to break shit well. So there are going to be pulses of the moment. You are going to have to read, in a sense, the context in which you are a practitioner, right? We wrote books that you are taught in your first years as if they would be true forever. They aren't. We're sorry. So you need to figure out what the right book is to read at the right time, okay? The third, which we'll talk about, is how to know if what you're doing is working, but I won't get into it. And it's the last one I want to talk to you about, this idea of building a social imagination. And the reason I want to talk to you about it is this. Very often, when you start thinking about stories, the biggest question you will get is that a lot of the most ideas that you think are the most important things to do are impractical. They are utopic. They are idealistic. They are things that aisa koi nahi karega. One of the biggest hurdles to being a practitioner is to be told repeatedly to be pragmatic. Being pragmatic is a very good thing. But the world has very rarely changed with pragmatism. And one of the things that you all have to realize is you are going to grow older, and you will grow older, I'm sorry. We haven't cracked that one yet, in a very difficult time. Our generation has left you with, how do you say this politely? A bit of a shit show, guys. I have to say, there's no other way to say it. We are really handing you a kind of mess. We're also doing what, in proper academic terms, is what Thomas Kuhn would call a paradigm shift. We grew up with a set of ideas about modernity, about progress, about good buildings, about built environment, about what it means to live a better life. And you guys are going to grow old in a generation where none of those things will be true anymore. You cannot take the modernity of the 21st century that you're learning, because that modernity will kill you with 3.5 degrees increase in heat. And we don't know what dreams to tell you to dream. We don't know if concrete is not the aspiration like it was for generations before us, then what it is. We don't know what cities should look like. We don't know if the cities we have right now are livable for human inhabitation. I have no idea if the National Capital Region of Delhi should exist at 28 million people, but it does. So one of the challenges you're going to have is you're going to have to really imagine radically new ways of living. And when you first imagine those radically new ways of living, people are going to laugh, okay? And they are going to think you're crazy, and they are going to call you outlandish. And that is where all good thought begins. Don't be afraid of that moment, right? But as a practitioner, you don't wait for your idea to become the it thing. You have to make your idea the hit thing. This is what we call building a social imagination. It means socializing an idea so that it actually can become something very normal. And I'm going to give you an example from my own life of an idea that when I was younger, I never thought would be remotely possible, but in my own lifetime, I have seen it become deeply normative. It has nothing to do with any of the things I've been talking about so far, which is what the nice thing about a disposition is. It is a story about what it means to be gay in India. I grew up as a gay man in India in the 1990s. Before the internet, okay? It is a particular thing, guys, to be gay in India before the internet, okay? And I genuinely asked myself, and my parents asked me, if it would be possible for me to live a life in India. And it was a question to which I actually had no answer. And it was a question that terrified me, deeply, deeply terrified me. I was very lucky. I was very lucky because I had no shame. I had no guilt about my sexuality. I had no shame about my sexuality. I have no idea why. I should have, by every logical, rational, analytical bone in my body, I should have been deeply ashamed. But I wasn't, right? And I told my parents when I told them, I said, I'm sorry, I know you think I should be shameful, but you unfortunately raised me right, and I have self-esteem, and so I just don't have any shame, and I can't fake it, right? But that didn't solve the problem of saying, could I sit in front of you, being invited for a perspectives lecture at a prestigious university, be an openly gay professor in India? When I was 15 years old, unimaginable. I left school. I went to Delhi Public School, Arkipuram. Wow, that was not a joke, guys. It was just my school, okay? Like, the earlier joke you didn't laugh at, DPS Arkipuram you think is hysterical, huh? Okay. All of you like very fancy. I know you went to some Sri Ram Goenka, modern, Sardar Patel, you keep it. Some of us just went to DPS, okay? And there were 6,000 people, right? So, I mean, there must have been some other gay people, no, in school? I didn't know one. There wasn't one. Think of that kind of silence. Think of that question of loneliness, right? Where you can't see one other person who you possibly could share something with, right? At that point, what does it mean to practice? Do you leave the country? I considered it. I went to very good colleges in America. I went to Harvard as an undergrad. I went to Berkeley for my PhD. I could have stayed 100 times. 100 people looked at me. My mother called me when I was 21 and begged me on the phone. She said, don't come home. It was 1999. She said, don't come home. You'll never live any of your dreams at home, okay? All right, I am here, so you know how that story ended. But what do you do at that point as a practitioner? This is the story I want to tell you, okay? So I'm going to read from the text. Starting from 2001, a set of legal petitions were submitted to the Delhi High Court challenging the constitutional validity of Section 377, a colonial-era provision in the Indian Penal Code that criminalized what it called voluntary carnal intercourse against the order of nature. Okay? Though nothing in its text necessitated this in its everyday life, this section of law acted to criminalize same-sex sexual relations. When the petitions were filed, queer life in Indian cities was hyper-visible and invisible, an open secret that nevertheless had little recognizable footprint in the form of associations, movements, groups, and publics. Indeed, when the government of India filed its reply in court to the petitions, it argued that there were, in fact, no gay people in India to be oppressed. Very convenient. And even if there were, queerness was not something Indian society was willing to think about, let alone accept. Suspecting this to be at least partially true, queer activists spent as much time outside the court as within it. They wrote books and public op-ed pieces in newspapers. They organized parades and marches. They mobilized film and media. They narrated life stories, wrote love letters, intervened in public and private crises, ran away from home, organized parties, ran from violent families, built support systems, protested police and family violence, and at times, slowly lived everyday lives with slowly increasing visibility. They acted individually, but also at times in concert, making collectives across scale and institutional form. Slowly but surely, cities bore their imprint, and every year it grew firmer. Indeed, it was perhaps only in cities that this specific imprint was possible. Years later, in 2009, the petition succeeded in the Delhi High Court. I was there, court number 1. When they did, there was a public waiting to receive the victory. Change had come both swiftly and slowly, and at least some imaginations of queer people had found roots, language, cultural and legal expression, and institutional foundations. In 2013, the Indian Supreme Court overturned the Delhi High Court victory. This time, the uncertain reception of the 2009 judgment was replaced with publics that had the language and imagination to condemn the reversal. Unlikely allies emerged throughout the country who had not existed when the petitions were filed over a decade earlier, and not even when the case had been won in 2009. Activists said that they saw the loss as a temporary setback, confident in the long arc of history bending towards justice. In 2018, when the Constitution bench of the same Supreme Court once again reversed the decision to finally close the chapter and decriminalize homosexuality, this faith was proven right. For our disposition, our interest in this narrative is particular. It is in the slow building of an imagination over 17 years from the first petition in 2001 to the final verdict in 2018 that made a practice not just possible, but a kind of common sense for many. Building this imagination, seeking a public that is often not yet here when we start, is a key part of an urban disposition. It is also a part of practice that is paid insufficient attention to. Debates on what is to be done can have some familiar rhythms: an impulse to be radical, a caution to be pragmatic, a desire to preserve continuity, an instinct to disrupt. In these debates, it is mostly either the motivation of the practitioner or the constraints of the circumstances that are seen to be the deciding factor that tilts the debate one way or the other. Yet one of the sensibilities of an urban disposition must be to not take the current limits of our imagination as humans as fixed. Our task must be to expand the bounds of what is imaginable, building the conditions of possibility for our practices to be received differently by a public that we seek to be part of building. There are many terms that describe this set of practices: building a social imagination, creating a new discourse, utopic or idealistic thinking, or being future ready. Regardless of how they are named, their task is what matters: to build a common affect, a desire for certain ideas, values, and practices to exist precisely among those who will be their constituencies in the future. Instinctively, we all know an idea that we have seen go from radical to imaginable and desirable within our lifetimes. What is necessary is not to just witness this, but participate in the making of this shift, and to see it as part of our practice, to hold it in distinction from other forms of doing and implementing where current constraints may dominate. To put it simply, while doing what we can today, we must always already be seeding what we want to be able to do tomorrow. Such future work can be specific: to socialize the idea of basic income, slum upgrading, gender disaggregation of data, or off-grid energy systems, whatever it is that is your fight. It can also be more diffused and value-based, seeking to create a desire for dignity, democratic equivalence, or justice, and to give these diffused ideals a certain shape or form. The methods available for such practice will then also vary from the aesthetic, the cultural and discursive interventions, to forms of mobility, convening, organizing, and advocacy, to even translation, communication, and the synthesis of evidence. Sometimes it aligns precisely with what we do and how we do things. We wield our research, we advocate, we push, we translate, we spread what we hope will be a new gospel. At others, these practices push us to new terrain, to act, write, speak, communicate, travel, urge, convince, and seduce, and do so with new publics that our practices formally may or may not require us to reach, ranging from policymakers to family WhatsApp groups, neighborhood associations to public gatherings, elected representatives to high net worth investors, friends and lovers to local and national media. There is fortunately no one way to build an imagination. The only condition is that it must circulate freely and publicly and have the ability to travel to those whose sensibilities it seeks to mold in a way they are able to receive it. Doing this work has few maps, and in the middle of it, it is hard to know if anything one does is shifting the wind. Yet in our experience, this labor has its own rewards outside successes. It shapes us as practitioners, as citizens, as humans, reminding us of our own values, and indeed, sometimes even revealing them to us. It tells us who we are. It allows us a horizon outside immediate problem solving, endless firefighting. It challenges our instincts and our methods, our institutional locations and our problem spaces. It can offer respite, hope, and possibility. One is trying, moving, making the world one desires, even amidst the uncertainties of how much is changing every day, week, month, or year, as much as it can feel amorphous and loose and frustrating at times. In some ways, this form of practice is indistinguishable from life itself. It might be what, as practitioners, we need, to paraphrase the poet Audre Lorde, in order for our feelings to survive. We practice towards a future not just to create it, but hopefully also to create ourselves in its image, so that seeking and striving for it will transform us as much as they shape the world upon us. So I wish you, in your practice, with this sensibility, a kind of armory that will hold you. You will receive many problems in your life. And I mean the ones that are external to your own existential crises. When you find them, remember to stop, not rush either to analysis or to practice, to hold these three elements of the disposition together, and to remember that one part of your practice is not just to do, but to imagine, and to create the pathways for your own future selves. Because we, handing the torch to you, are also waiting to see what imaginations to follow. So I look forward to seeing what you come up with, and I thank you very consistently for your attention. That's it.
Thank you, sir, for such an enriching talk. We shall now open the floor and have a Q&A session. Request all of you to be as interactive and curious as possible.
Yeah. Good. So the first thing you do, so you guys heard the question? The question is, if you can't give water to a slum because it is illegal, A, why is it still illegal? And B, what does one do to get over that? Good. One of the first things you have to do is what you are already beginning to do, which is A, to realize that this illegality exists around you, and then to start thinking analytically about what could be the reasons. What's the core tension about, let's try this together. What's the core tension about what makes a slum illegal? What makes a slum illegal? What makes any kind of housing illegal? They don't own the land perfectly. Good. Now, so if they don't own the land, why are they living there? There's no? Good. So now start thinking about an argument. Okay? Here's the argument. You come to a city, all right? Reverse the highway. You want to live. So either the only ways to live legally are what? You either rent, right? Or you buy, right? If you have the ability to do neither, you still have to live somewhere, right? Because it's roti, kapda, and makan, right? Now the thing is, makan has become housing, which has become real estate, which has become property. Roti and kapda still separate. So one of our big challenges is, it's not just a question of flipping the switch and legalizing the slum. Because you can legalize what is there today. You should do it anyways. You can legalize what is there today, but people will still come. So now you step back analytically and say, what happened to our housing market? Why can a worker not afford legal housing? And it will begin, that is where you begin the journey of understanding and saying, how come our cities have this patchwork of legal and illegal housing? And it's not just the slum. Think of all the words for housing you know in your cities. The urban village, the unauthorized colony, the irregular layout, the irregular subdivision, the chawl, the watala, the cherry, the Gauthan, the this colony, the that colony, right? In fact, 8 of every 10 housing structures in India has some tension with the law. If 8 of every 10 houses has some structure with the law, are people breaking the law, or is on the law on the wrong side of people? So we need to start thinking about how we created a housing market where a majority of residents of cities cannot legally enter that market. And you have to then frame this illegality, right, in a different way. But that work has to be done by us, right? It has to be done not just by movements of housing rights folks who argue for the legalization of slums. They have to be met by urban practitioners who are planners and architects and designers who agree with them. The planners, architects, and designers we have, 95% of them do not ask the question of the slums legality at all. They think it's not their built environment. It's not where their clients are, it's not where their projects are, it's not where they work. So one of the reasons why the slum remains illegal is because all of us who study the cities don't ask this question you're asking until you came to this lecture today. And if you don't ask this question, ain't nobody going to answer it, right? So part of the illegality of our cities, we produce. We produce it through our own planning. We produce it because of the amount of land we give to real estate of different kinds. We produce it because we don't regulate our land markets. And then what do? Because we need the labor, we also bring workers in trucks when a stadium has to be built, tell them to settle by the Sabarmati, and then evict them from the Sabarmati where we settle them. You all live in a city where the riverbank that got so many awards, built by a practitioner of this institute, and I'm saying this because I would say it to him, and I have said it to him, we have fought publicly about this 100 times, right? Moved people from that riverbank who were not people who settled on it willingly, but were placed there by governments of this state when they were needed for other labor projects in Ahmedabad. Exactly like the way the slums on the side of the Yamuna Pushta in Delhi were built because they needed to be brought in for the 1984 Asian Games. And then they were brought in again for the 2010 Commonwealth Games. So when the labor is needed, all those migrants are brought. But when they are bought, they are not met with any adequate housing. So if the state will not build that housing and the market will not build that housing, people will build their own housing. And that is actually the housing market in Indian cities. Most housing in India is not built by any practitioner with a degree. Most housing in India is built by people. It is built by themselves. It is built slowly, incrementally. That's why when you run around your hometowns, you will always see a house where the brick is still not plastered, and those, we call them in North India the saria, don't you know them? The concrete rods are always sticking out, because housing in India is life. It is bit by bit, incremental against every kind of odd, right? And people are forced into this. So the illegality of the slum is the break and the broken nature of our housing markets, and we have allowed them to break. And the problem is we have collectively allowed them to break in a way that we have not yet been able to resolve. Right? And so the question then is, and then we use that illegality exactly against them. Cannot give water, cannot give slum, cannot give X, cannot give Y. Right? And so this tension has been there. It's at the heart of our urbanization. But when we teach urban planning, we don't teach about incrementally self-built housing. We teach about designed, constructed, and built housing. So part of the problem is us. It's us as faculty in urban schools who teach urbanism in a way that looks nothing like our cities. So our own practitioners are surprised by the slum. Right? So I'll give you a quick question. You guys will be trained as architects. You will be trained on how to build with concrete, with steel. But you will not be taught how to build with tarpaulin. You know what the most common material of low-income housing in India is? Tarpaulin. When you fly into Bombay, you see that blue, that's tarpaulin. Actual material engineering that improves the ability for that tarpaulin to keep out the rain will do more for people's housing than 25 iconic architectural projects of India post-2000. I'm not pushing you guys on architectural projects. I'm saying part of our disjunct, part of the fact is that A, we have normalized these conditions to a point that we've stopped asking questions of our own practice. And the other problem is, to solve the illegality of the slum, You need the planner and the lawyer and the sociologist and the engineer and the architect and the politician. And the minute a problem needs all of those, it gets harder and harder to solve. Right? But the first thing we have to do is to get the idea that 2024 India, Vishwaguru number 72 for whatever we are, should not have people who live without dignified housing. And the real reason why the slum still exists is because we as a people do not have agreement on that. You know the one place where the word housing never appears? The Constitution. It's very odd. Not forget in the fundamental rights chapter, in directive principles, nowhere in the Constitution, not once. So to me, our biggest reason why housing inequality persists is because we don't have a social contract that says no Indian should be without dignified housing. You have it for education, you have it for health, you have it for food. We don't have it for housing. Until we don't have that agreement, there will always be that illegality. And so are there ways to legalize a slum? It can be done like this. One government order. Ahmedabad did it. They did land titling under a Parivartan scheme through the 90s. Odisha just did it for all slums in the state under the Jaga mission 5 years. Keeps happening in moments. Keeps moving in moments. Right? So the technicality is like this. The land can be legalized like this. But the will to do it, right? The will not to turn to demolition, to not think of people as encroachers. Right now you talk to people about the slum, they'll say, kabza kiya hai zameen ko. If you look at people and don't call them workers and say, kabza kiya hai zameen ko, then why will you solve the problem? A lot of the problem of the slum is the problem of the disrespect to the worker who lives in that slum. Those two things are rotted together. That's partly where we are.
Coming to the point where you said part of it is because there was disrespect. So where I'm from, they built a couple of housing. They built a couple of housing areas just for the people from slums so that they don't live there. But a lot of the people prefer to not go to the houses there, but they remained in their slum areas.
Good. Why do you think that is? Excellent. Now you got another problem. Use the disposition. Why do you think they would not go? Good. Good, because their primary determinant for housing is proximity to work. Now think about the analysis. People come to the city, migrants don't come to the city for housing. They come for work. They will do anything to live near work. Why? Because if you live far from work, that 125 rupees you make a day cannot absorb 35 rupees transport. And so actually part of the housing problem is actually a transportation problem. And good transportation engineers say, tum sab ghar banana band kar do, you give us free public transport, the housing problem will solve itself. And they're not wrong. Right? It is location. It is absolutely. We call it, in housing studies, we call it viability. The word we use is viability. You can give me a pakka house of 3 bedrooms away from work, I will still live in the kholi next to the factory. Because my relationship of that house is to make my employment viable. Right? Those trade-offs viable. We have to work with that. This is not just true of poor households. Viability is equally true of rich households. But rich households can privatize transport. Right? So you can move to the suburb because you can drive. And so your ability to make viability move shifts. So part of the reason is, so the rate of abandonment of government-built pakka housing under the slum rehab scheme of the government of Maharashtra is 70% when that new housing is more than 3 kilometers from the original. Why? Because 3 kilometers is exactly what walkable work looks like. So housing is not just a unit problem or an adequate unit problem or a 30 square meter versus 40 square meter problem. It is a location, transportation, wage problem. Same exact thing. Water is all of those things, so is housing. Right? And that's part of the distinction that we are thinking of. Make sense? Good question. Yeah. You can just project.
Where do you think this concept came from? Like, I want to know your personal opinions about this concept. What do you think it really means and how it applies and all?
So the reason I think about the word normative, because it helps me as a person, right? Every person has to think of it as a normative location, okay? So you have a position in your life, you have a set of beliefs. They're not fixed. They're also not always certain, right? It's not like I have decided कि ये मेरा belief system है and I am locked in. Very, very few humans live like that. But mota, as you grow, you have experiences in life, and your normative experiences come from, you tell me, where do they come from? Where do you get your values from?
Everyday experiences.
Experiences, good. Where else? Where do you get values from? You get them from your parents. How do your parents know what values to teach you? Where do they get it from? I know guys, their parents. But what are the source of values? How do you know right and wrong? कहाँ से आता है?
For religious, it could be
religion is a very good one. Absolutely. You turn to religion to know right from wrong. Where else do you turn to know right from wrong?
Constitution.
I wish that was more an answer for more people, but let's go with it. The Constitution. But more broadly, abstract that. So the Constitution is part of what? Starts with L, rhymes with bo. Excellent, right? Law is a very good way to think about right and wrong, right? If I tell you ये illegal है, your instinct is कि गलती होगा. Right, that is what 377 was for us. Actually, when we filed that case in the High Court, that was my affidavit said that. कि जब तक ये कानून इस पे है, someone will look at me and say, इसमें कुछ तो problem होगी ना तेरे साथ, नहीं तो why is it illegal? No one has ever looked at something illegal and was like, that sounds like fun, other than one category of drugs. Except for them, no one has ever looked at illegality and said, this is a solid thing, यही करते हैं, right? So law is a very strong source of normative values. Religion is a very strong source of normative values. What else? Where else do you guys where do you get truth from, guys? These are the big philosophy wala raat ke 2 baje drunk kya main batata hu dekho type questions, right? Like, where do you get it from? Media, right? You get it from one of the places that transmit values of right and wrong, cinema. My God. I mean, every kind of visual affect, right? Like, half the boys that I grew up with simply could not understand the notion of consent and stalking because we grew up watching Bazigar. There is literally the only logic you had was that you chase until you can't chase anymore, right? It's a very weird internal kind of logic. Cinema is absolutely a place you do right and wrong. Science is absolutely a place. So just keep the same example. When we were attacked as gay people for being abnormal and unnatural, we turned to science. Right? And there's a lot of gay people who were just like, ek gene dhoond lo yaar, then we can be done with this debate. Not all of us wanted it. Meko nahi chahiye gene. Right? But my point was that so science, law, religion, these are all spaces in which human beings have always looked for notions of right and wrong. Okay? So the question of where does the sense that you have to have something normative come from, it is the essence of human society. Because you have more, the minute man went from nature to society, the question of right and wrong, right? If you follow the Bible, then the minute she took a bite of the apple, there was sin. The minute there was sin, there was wrong. That means there was right. So the beginning of all human society is, tell me thoda sa what is. You can call it morality, you can call it faith, you can call it values, you can call it justice. But we are constantly looking for this notion of right and wrong. That's what the normative is. The reason why I say that a normative must be part of our professional practice and not just, so हम क्या कहते हैं वो मेरे personal values हैं. And I'm saying ये distinction नहीं होता between personal values and that, right? The reason the slum doesn't offend you is a normative question. How do I fix the problem of the slum is an analytical question. But तुम्हें गुस्सा क्यों नहीं आता? How do we all just live in this country with our levels of inequality? How do we just do it, right? That's a normative question. And learning to hold that anger and not drown in it is an operational practice. Because there is no point feeling endless anger that you cannot control. But if you feel no anger, then nothing will change, right? We used to have an email signature when I was in college saying, if you are not outraged, you are not paying attention. It's a nice signature. But if you're always outraged, you're not doing anything, right? And that balance is hard. But for me, the biggest thing about the normative, what's your name? The biggest thing about a normative location is, I don't know if you guys ever saw Sunday 9 a.m. wala Ramayan Mahabharata. Did you guys ever see this on the thing? You remember when the war used to happen because us time CGI nahi tha? That arrow used to come from the left and the arrow came from the right and then the green dots would come and then the purple dots would come and one would vanish. So values are a lot like that. Because what happens is values are not like ye bhi hai, ye bhi hai, ye bhi hai. Values clash and they compete, right? So I'll give you a classic debate that you all will have to deal with in your lives. Environmental preservation versus the right to develop. Okay? The same slum is on the riverbank. So to protect the river, I have to take the housing out. To protect the housing, I have to leave the housing on the riverbank. These are when I care about the environment, I also care about the housing. So in my normative location, I now have a clashing set of values. And a normative location forces you to say, which is the one you are living to give up? Because you cannot pretend that there is not a trade-off. This is what we do, right? So we will do a new policy that wants more inclusive, faster, and more sustainable growth, comma, comma. Child, please. Okay, you want faster growth, you use coal. You want more sustainable, you don't use coal. You cannot do both. Normative locations are like, pick guys. So to me, normative locations in practice are about making choices that are difficult, but you say, I will fight for this and not that. And that is one of the reasons you will disagree, because you will pick the housing and she'll pick the river. Your values are not in consonance, but your normative locations are different, right? You will have a lot of empathy for her position, she will have empathy for your position, but you have made different choices. And in the Maidan of practice, you will be fighting with each other. But that fight will be a quality of disagreement where at least you will try and say, is there a middle ground? The only reason you'll have a middle ground is because you have empathy for each other's positions. You're not enemies, right? So a normative location for me is how do you make trade-offs between different things? So Amartya Sen has a very nice philosophical way to explain this. He called it the theory of the basal variable, okay? So what is a basal variable? Amartya Sen said that every person has a primary variable that holds their values, and they will tolerate inequalities in other variables as long as they get progress in theirs. Very simple. I'm a good Marxist. I will tell gender to wait until after the revolution, right? It's not that I don't understand in gender rights, but my basal variable is class change. So I will tolerate gender inequality within communism if I will get class change. You have an exact opposite position where you are unwilling, right? So the Dalit critique of the women's movement said we are not going to submerge the question of caste for feminism, right? So our basal variable is different. I will tolerate certain environmental injustice if it makes poor people's lives better, right? Or I will not tolerate environmental injustice even if it comes at the cost, temporary cost of displacement. So Sen's argument was when you're fighting with somebody, imagine their basal variable. What is the priority they are making? Why are they disagreeing with you? Sometimes they're disagreeing with you because your values are entirely different. Sometimes they've just made a different choice on that trade-off. So this is what normative locations are. So when I read people's propositions, ye karna chahiye shehron mein, I want them to tell me, because I believe this, value this, and prioritize this, ye karo. Right? So that if I disagree with that person, I don't disagree with their methods, I disagree with their starting assumptions. Right? So I can have a big fight with, say, McKinsey on low-income housing because they believe the market should provide it. Right? But our fights are very respectful because we disagree on the analysis, we don't disagree on the location. Right? And that matters. Right? So I think for me, a lot of the question really, in fact, my fights with environmentalists are sharper than my fights with McKinsey housing market consultants, which is very surprising to me, I have to say. But it's that question, our locations don't differ. Make sense?
Hi, so I don't have a perfect question, but I'm going to throw some words at you. I want your views on it. It is
Match the following types.
Informality, paralegal, gray areas, and different scales of the city from individual level to the city.
Sure.
So, and also the tools to assess all of it,
Sure.
where the values clash and everything.
Sure. So if you want to think about informality, you will always play in questions of degrees, right? So a lot of the times it is easier to think of formal, informal. But वो actually ऐसी कोई चीज़ होती नहीं है, right? Nothing is completely formal, nothing is completely informal. If you take housing, you can take a perfectly formal house, all the kagas is right, all the title deed is right, master plan is right. He will extend his balcony beyond the building plan. Building plan level informality, right? You will never find something. So the question about informality, for me, the way I would think about it is different. I would say, who is doing the labeling and why? Okay? Who is interested in labeling different kinds of informality with each other? Why is the planner interested in this table? Because he wants to say unauthorized colony में ये हो जाएगा, इसमें ये नहीं होगा. The intent of calling something formal or informal is where the real maza of the story is. Right? When a tax authority calls a business formal or informal, they don't give a shit about the unit, the karkhana, the labor rights, whatever. They care about what? Will I get tax or not? So the intent of classifying a micro enterprise as formal or informal is GST collection. The intent of the Delhi Jal Board is to say, where do I have to give pipe and where do I not? The intent of a high court is to say, where is there demolition and where is there not, right? So, but the intent of the labor inspector is to say, तेरा कारखाना registered हो ना हो, तेरे worker के पास social security होनी चाहिए, right? So the question of informality that is most important is, who is asking the question? What is at stake in this definition? Because the definition does not exist. One thing remember guys always, you'll read a lot of texts in life. It will appear that things just are. But concepts are not words alone. A word, you can look at the dictionary will tell you, iska matlab ye hai. A concept never has one meaning. That's why it's a concept. A concept is like a chashma, like a pair of glasses, okay? It's like I'm looking at these three types of housing. I can't understand them, they look fuzzy. I wear the chashma of informality and I can say, oh, ABC. So a concept is something that makes the world come into focus. It helps you understand what's going on, which means it's a tool, not a word. So anytime you come to a concept like informality, don't say what is informal, what is not informal. There's no such thing. Depending on why you're asking, what are you calling informal and what impact does that have? Okay? And therefore, tax economic informality, planning spatial informality, labor informality, social, all become very different, right? If your interest is in corruption, you're interested in informal governance, right? So why does this word informality move across so many different types of things? Governance may be here, housing may be here, economy may be here, society may be here, because it's not a thing, it's a lens, it's a chashma, it's a nazariya, it's a method, right? So keep saying, isme kya hai informal, right? And that gives you a very nice practice of then what does formalization look like? I'll give you an example. We say informal sector, construction worker, domestic worker, waste worker. What is it that you care about that waste worker? The National Commission for Employment says workers should have maternity leave, pension, PF. Agar uske paas ye teen hai, wo formal hai. I don't care if it's a domestic worker with no employment letter or whatever, right? So the reason the National Commission cares is because they care about the workers' rights. So informality there is a measure of workers' rights, right? So ask it this way. Ask the intent of who's using the labeling for what purpose, and then ask yourself, why are you using the idea of informality? What is it that you're actually trying to look at? You're not actually trying to look at informality. You're trying to look at labor or housing or economy. So जिस चीज़ को देख रहा है उस पे focus कर, and पूछ कि informality इस चीज़ के बारे में मुझे क्या दिखाती है? Make sense?
Does anyone have one more question? Due to constraint of time, we can have one more question. No? All right. Well, on that part, thank you, sir, for giving...
Oh, he's here. Okay, sorry. Where is he talking from?
Thank you, sir, for giving us the honor to learn from you. On behalf of CEPT University, I extend a heartfelt appreciation and gratitude for your time. Can we have a big round of applause for Mr. Gautam Bhan?
Yes, thank you. It is a pleasure.
As we conclude this session, please note our speaker's book is available for purchase by the entrance.
It's cheap. I fought very hard to make it cheap, so don't laugh. Okay. Thanks, guys. It was a lot of fun. Enjoy yourselves.